it's all pre-taped.
I'm Diane, standing in front of the Golden Gate Bridge, where I am actually not currently. This is not live, but local stories about Arlington for and about Arlingtonians. So I'm joined today by Liane Rozzell, who is a senior policy advisor for the Annie Casey Foundation located in Baltimore. But at the moment, she's on loan, I guess is a good way to put it, to Arlington County, working on a program in restorative justice. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about how you came to Arlington, and welcome to the program.
Sure. Thanks, Diane. It's great to be here. So I actually met my now wife, and she was living in Arlington with our son, who at the time was 10 years old. And I was living in DC, and we decided that it was better to come to Arlington, for me to come to Arlington. And so I did in 1998 when we had our commitment ceremony, and we've been together ever since and been in Arlington ever since. So it's been a great place to be. We especially came here because we knew it was diverse, and we would have good educational options for our son.
So let's talk a little bit about restorative justice. That's what you're here to work on. And I guess your program is Restorative Arlington. Do I have that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's an initiative that we're doing out of the county manager's office. So the Casey Foundation loaned me to the county manager's office for this year, 2020. And I'm actually acting as a catalyst for us to figure out how we're going to implement restorative practices in the legal system, in the schools, and in the community.
Okay, so what's a good working definition of restorative justice?
So restorative justice really encompasses an approach that says that when there is conflict or harm, that the people who are most affected need to be the ones who come together and find a solution for that. In a wider sense, actually, though, it's about relationships and building relationships. And so some aspects of what some people call restorative justice include community building processes and practices. So it's even bigger than conflicts. We see what we call restorative practices being used in schools, for example, to help build a strong school climate and good relationships between students and staff. And also using some of those restorative practices for teaching for purposes, and to make sure that everybody is included in the conversation and in the learning process. Mm-hmm. So there's a range of approaches that come under that whole umbrella of restorative practices or restorative justice.
I heard you use the word harm. Can you talk a little bit about what harm means in this context?
Sure. Harm really defines something that happens to someone where they are frankly harmed. And I use that phrase instead of crime because crime is a legal definition. And there are things that are crimes that may or may not actually harm someone. So a crime can be a harm, but also, well, take, for example, use of marijuana. In some places it's being decriminalized, in other places it's still a crime. So we focus more on harm. And when a person or persons are harmed, and a person or person commits harm, that what needs to happen is some kind of process to address the needs that arise from that harm. And to hold that person accountable to acknowledge the harm that happened, to be able to share and express, this is what happened to me, this is the result of what you did to me, and to have that person acknowledge that. That's a piece of what real accountability is, and take responsibility for what they did, for making amends and repairing the harm wherever possible, and for being the kind of person becoming the kind of person who doesn't do that again.
Now, do we also take into consideration the background of the person who inflicted the harm? I mean, is that part of the reconciliation process, if you will?
Sure. And I'm going to say, I'll make a couple of caveats when I talk about restorative justice in this context of harm, because this is where most people understand it. First of all, it's a voluntary process, never coerced for anybody. So that means everybody has to enter into it in that spirit of being voluntary. And when we don't really like to use the word reconciliation or forgiveness, even though those often happen in a restorative process, because they're not, the idea isn't to come into it with an expected outcome that says, you must forgive this person, you must be reconciled. So often you find that people who do harm have been victims of harm themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, the expression is hurt people hurt people.
Sure.
That doesn't excuse what they did. And it gives a context that sometimes is a helpful context for the person who's the victim of that harm. Then the focus can be, if we look at the roots of what happened, the focus can be on how do we break the cycle?
Okay.
How do we help the person who's committed the harm break out of a trauma cycle that includes acting out?
Okay.
And when we take our approaches that we typically use now that are punitive, those never get to those root issues.
So you did say that this is an optional process, it's a choice. So at what point in the legal process does a choice like this present itself?
So that's a really good question, because there are so many places within the legal process where restorative process could come into play. That really depends on how people want to set up the program. We advocate, I say we in the sort of sense of most restorative practitioners and advocates that I know really advocate for it to happen as early as possible in the process. And so we see examples in different parts of the country, including right next door in Fairfax, where police at the point where they might arrest somebody have the option to refer them to a restorative process.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't even come to the point of arrest.
Okay.
There are other places where the charge comes to a prosecutor, and the prosecutor has the ability to refer the case for restorative justice at the point they're deciding whether or not to charge the person.
Right. I'm assuming a goal is to reduce the number of incarcerations. Okay.
Yes.
And actually done facilitation in the restorative justice process?
I have not. I've been trained, and I've had some, and I've observed. I've had some training in a basic restorative process called circle process.
Right.
But in terms of conflict or harm, I'm still at the apprentice stage. The idea of my coming here wasn't for me to be the practitioner providing the services, but for us to explore together as Arlingtonians how we're going to adopt these practices.
So when the year is up, the clock strikes midnight. What happens then for both your work here, but how can we as Arlingtonians or people who are interested in this ensure that what you laid the foundation for continues?
Sure. So that brings me to the second deliverable that I was going to mention, which is people. We are looking to have a cadre of informed champions by the end of the year, and they're already in place because they're doing this work to carry it forward. And we're also looking through our strategic planning at how we create a structure that's going to help move that forward.
Okay.
We're not quite sure yet what that structure looks like, but to be sure, we're going to be putting in place some kinds of mechanisms and ways to keep the work moving forward.
Right.
So, yeah.
You see linkages between what the county manager is attempting to do with community conversations around equity, combating racism, looking at a different way to be in the community and to support one another? Is this a part of it?
Most definitely, most definitely. We are taking all of this restorative work infused with an equity focus. There's no other way, as far as I'm concerned, to do restorative practices work than with an equity focus.
That's great. And if Arlingtonians wanted to get involved in this effort or to be supportive, visibly supportive of this effort, what would you suggest they do?
So I'd suggest a couple things. We do have an email list right now that if you go to the county webpage and the subscribe section, you can subscribe to the Restorative Arlington list. That will keep you up on some, what we're doing, information about what's happening. We're just through August, we're doing some virtual circles, V-circles we call them. It's a response we have to the pandemic, where people have an opportunity to try out restorative practice known as circle process. Okay. We adapted that to the virtual piece. But we'll be, through the email list, we'll be letting people know how they can get more involved and the different activities and things that we'll have going on.
Okay. And the librarian in me has to ask, if I wanted to start educating myself on the topic, where would I begin? What would be a good handbook, if you will, to begin with? Sure.
Well, there's a really quick, simple one called The Little Book of Restorative Justice by Howard Zaire. So that's one recommendation. Just get a quick overview of what restorative justice is. There are also a number of books in that series, The Little Books of Restorative Justice. So there's one, The Little Book of Restorative Justice in Education, for people who are interested in how we apply it to the schools. And that book has a strong equity focus as well, their approach in that. The Little Book of Race and Restorative Justice is another good one. And then one I do recommend, because I think it really shifts the lens, is by Danielle Serret. It's called Until We Reckon, and the subtitle is Violence, Mass Incarceration, and a Road to Repair. And in that, Danielle breaks out why it is that our current punitive approach really fails people who've been harmed by crime.
Right.
And then she talks about what true accountability is. And some of those chapters are, I think they're precious and apply beyond just violent offenses, but it's a really good discussion of those issues and how restorative practices work with that.
Well, you've certainly emphasized the humanity that this process can bring out, and I think that gives me hope that there is a way out of some of this more punitive focus on law and order, and recognizing the complexity of these issues, and how there are, frankly, other ways than just in school situations, suspensions, or jail sentences. So looking forward to seeing more of this as it unfolds. Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with as a reminder of keeping our eye on this issue and being supportive of it?
Sure. Yeah, I think I want to say that there's a reason that people are embracing this at this time in particular. I think we recognize that equity calls us to move toward restorative approaches, and that it's not even just about not punishing or not doing some things. It's about a positive relationship that actually solves problems. And that's the thing to note, that what we've been doing has not been as effective as we might like to think. Right. And this is something that's effective. It's proven to be effective in, if you're talking about the criminal justice aspect, in reducing reoffending, which is one of the major measures that people use, and in helping people who've been harmed to recover and to do better. So I think when we think about how do we address the needs that people have, it's important to look at what are some of the most effective ways of doing that. And this is one of those.
And certainly contributing to the social fabric and being supportive of one another in community. Yes. So, well, I appreciate the time to talk with you this afternoon. Sure. And I will get back to touring the lovely city by the bay. Thank you for being a part of our series, and best wishes as you finish the project.
Great. Thank you so much, Diane.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Islands, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream water.